All right, Larry, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being on.
Thank you. This is only the 3rd podcast I've ever been on in my life.
Are you familiar with them? Do you listen to any of them?
I'm not a podcast person. I am familiar with them. I kind of like the structure that my life has when I know, oh, that radio program's on at 9 o'clock Sunday. I got to work my life around it. So it's like having a calendar. But
Yeah,
eventually I'll get into podcasts.
yeah. So you moved up to Alaska in the 70s. What prompted the move?
May 26th, 1976. My late wife and I were both working for a newspaper in Chicago. And one night, sitting around, I think, waiting for pizza to be delivered, we were reading a journalism trade magazine and just kind of killing time, reading the classified ads, and found the newspaper in Wrangell was for sale. We weren't looking to move to Alaska. We weren't looking to buy a newspaper, but it seemed interesting. And like I say, waiting for pizza. So I thought, well, there's a phone number here. I'll call them. I don't know. How much does it cost? And back in 76, they didn't have direct dial long distance yet in Wrangell. So it was after hours and the switchboard in town was closed. So the Thunderbird Hotel was where it rang because that's where the switchboard was with the plugs and the cords. Anyway, Francis answered. I said, I'm trying to reach Jamie Bryson with the Sentinel. Well, he's not at the office now. It's closed. Okay, can you switch me to his home? Well, he's not there. He's over at so and so's having dinner. Because, of course, Francis knew everything. So patched me in and talked to Jamie. And honestly, after a little bit, we thought, well, gee, it's $6,000 down. We have 6,000 between us. What else are we doing? So in 5 weeks' time, we quit our job, sold everything, got married, packed, and moved to Alaska.
That's kind of similar. It seems like during that time, the 70s and 80s, there was a lot to come to Alaska for. My parents, they were looking at the back of a magazine, an alumni magazine for University of Northern Colorado, and there was, teacher placement opportunities, and one of them was in Klawock, Alaska, and it was the same sort of thing where they were just like, "Hey, the kids are young enough where if we were to move, they're not really gonna be missing their friends because I was 5 and my brother was 8, so it was,
Right.
all right, packed up the station wagon and moved to Klawock, Alaska without it ever been to Prince of Wales Island, and there was 6 miles of paved road, and it was pretty wild.
Yeah. We did think of buying it sight unseen and thought, "Nah, we better." So we did. We took a 3-day weekend because, of course, I think it just took a day to get there, a day to stay, and anyway, we came and looked, and by then we had pretty much decided as long as we didn't hate it, we'd stay. And I remember the owner picked us up at the airport in Wrangell, of course, take us to the office, and we drove whatever it was, a mile and a half, got downtown. Well, we didn't know it was downtown. I said, "Well, are we in town?" He said, "Yeah, this is downtown." Back then, Front Street wasn't paved. It was rustic looking, but it grows on you.
There wasn't, like, an initial panic of "What am I doing here?" or "What have we gotten ourselves into?" Or was it
No,
charming?
the panic came when we moved, and back then there was no through jet service from
Mm.
Seattle to Wrangell, so we flew Seattle Ketchikan, and then the owner was gonna arrange for a friend to meet us with a plane and take us to Wrangell. Well, look, I grew up in Chicago. Planes are big. So we land in Ketchikan, get off the jet. This is before TSA, so you're just wandering around, and I'm looking, I don't see a plane. And this guy comes out of the terminal and says, "Hi, are you Larry and Leslie?" "Yeah." "Well, I'm Chuck Trailer. I'm going to take you to Wrangell." So, "Where's your plane?" He points at the Cessna 185 on floats. And I thought, oh, God, that's not a plane. But we got everything, fit everything into it, and got there okay.
That's awesome. So, when you first came up, what was the journalism like? You know, that it was kind of a hot time, there was a lot of things to write about with the oil and
Yeah.
fishing, a lot of the journalists that moved up in the '70s, there was plenty of stuff to write about. So what were the first journalistic goals when you got here?
Well, so in 76, the Trans-Alaska Oil Pipeline was still being built. Didn't start flowing till February 20, 1977. See, I don't know. Timber was still big,
Right.
in Southeast. Logging camps all over, and the sawmills and the pulp mills. So really timber and fishing dominated it. There was a cannery in Wrangell that did, well, the traditional 1 pound salmon. They also did a institutional 4 pound can that went to hospitals and schools. Everything was focused on the cannery in the summer and the logging camps and flying provisions and workers out to the camps. It was the oil, like I say, was still almost a year away, and the money hadn't started flowing yet from the oil. Though certainly a lot of people from Southeast took jobs on the pipeline because they paid well.
Mhm. So once the oil started flowing, you've been involved in writing about oil and gas for years now, decades. So in that first was the first inkling that this is going to be sustain Alaska's future. If we look at now, so much of our financial issues stem from maybe some of our attitudes that started way back then when it was this is going to be a forever thing and we're going to be flush with money for the foreseeable future. Like what was it about that first little bit that made Alaskans seem so excited about future financial or boom that would never end?
Well, in November 1976, Alaskans, by a 2-to-1 margin, approved a constitutional amendment to create the permanent fund, saying we're going to take some of the oil money and set it aside because we're going to need it someday. No oil will last forever. So, looking back on it, brilliant move, great thing we did. But even with saving a bunch of money for the permanent fund, we were still awash in oil dollars as Prudhoe Bay ramped up production. So the state had a lot of unmet needs: new schools, roads, harbors, airports. Did a lot of good things with it, but we developed a mentality, I think, an over reliance on it. And in 1980, the legislature voted to eliminate the income tax and to eliminate the business gross receipts tax, which were both so the foundation of the fiscal plan until oil started coming. In hindsight, well, I can say it. I think it was dumb, but that's what they did in 1980. They didn't need the money, not thinking, well, eventually we'll need the money. We'll just put the tax back. Well, you don't put a tax back. My God, people string you up, which they did. So moving to 2026, we've had more than 2 generations in Alaska that have never paid a tax to the state. We've had more than 2 generations who have gotten a check from the state every year with the permanent fund dividend that started in 1982. And I'm not condemning the dividend, but at some point, as oil production now is about 1/4 of what it was at its peak. Peak 1988, 2 million barrels a day. We're at about 450,000 barrels a day. It'll pick up here as a couple new big fields are coming online, but we're never going to get back anywhere remote to what we were. So less production, higher costs to produce oil, so less tax revenue. We have several 100,000 more people in Alaska than we did in the 70s. Costs of educating and providing services are higher. I think also having a tax of some kind on the state level for Alaskans, besides if we have an income tax, which is my preference, you'd get some money from the non-resident workers.
Mm,
About 25% of the oil industry is non-resident, even higher percentage, I think 37% in mining. They come, they use the services, and they go home, don't pay anything. So I guess to answer the question, I think an income tax would diversify our revenue sources so we're not just dependent on the price of oil and begin to pick up some of the needs that have been unmet as we've been really tight on
mm.
finances.
Two of the things that kinda get thrown around, one is, why can't we just ramp up oil production? And then 2, do the oil companies have such a sweet deal? Could we maybe make that deal not quite as sweet and make them pay more, so that way everything else can stay the same, but we just drill more or produce more or make the oil companies pay for more? Why do those things not end up happening?
Well, in terms of ramping up production, we, the state, can't do anything. The land's available to lease. We give out permit. It's up to companies to make the investment. So we do have a couple of big new fields that will be coming online. There's one called Pika, Pikka. The majority owner developer of it is a company called Santos, which is actually based in Australia. Their partner is Repsol, a Spanish oil and gas company. I think, I don't know how many billions of dollars it's taken to develop Pika. They expect to bring it online, start producing sometime this summer, I believe. There's another one under construction, probably won't be online for another 3 years or so, and that's called Willow. ConocoPhillips is developing that. Between Willow and Pica, you could see another couple 100,000 barrels a day. Substantial, yes, but not what we had. I think Willow, if I remember right, is a 8 billion, $9 billion investment. So the state has, I think, always encouraged development, but you've got to find companies with a deep pocket who are willing to say, I can find the oil, I know how I can produce it there and make money off of it. And that's an 8 or a $9 billion gamble. There was a field, oh, I don't know, 25 years ago called Badami. BP developed it. They spent, I don't know, $1 billion, but back then that's probably 2 or 3 billion today's dollars. They found it, they developed it, they thought it would flow lots of oil. Well, it just, the plumbing doesn't work. The sand
Mm.
just keeps essentially clogging up the drill bits. So sometimes they can do all the engineering, the exploration, spend billions, and it just doesn't work. So to answer your question, you got to find companies who are willing to spend billions. It's hard to you can only work up on the slope in the winter. You can't work in the summer, so it's not year round. You've got companies, say Conoco, and every year the management looks at, well, we've got this prospect in Alaska and this one in Texas or this one in Oklahoma or this one in the North Sea. What has the most likelihood of success, the lowest risk, the bigger payback? That's what they're going to pick. So, to answer the tax question, yeah, we could raise taxes, but you raise it too high and you risk them picking somewhere else. And there's no magic number. There just isn't.
Right. How good are these companies at being clean about this? Because obviously the United States, compared to a lot of other countries, has much higher environmental standards. So obviously there is an impact on the ecosystems. But how good are these companies? And maybe over the last, what you've seen the technology improve over the last 40 years, what's that been?
Well, sure, there's been accidents, there's been spills. There's certainly the Exxon Valdez spill
Right.
stands out. But generally, I'd say their Alaska standards are stricter than elsewhere. So take natural gas, for example. When you drill a hole, you produce oil, natural gas, and water. In most cases, comes up the same pipe. In Alaska's case, they separate it out, put the oil in the pipeline, and sell it. The natural gas they re-inject, the water they re-inject. In Texas, the laws are pretty lax. If you don't want to spend the money to re-inject the natural gas and there's no pipeline to move the natural gas to market, you can get permission from the state of Texas to vent your gas flare, just burn it off into the atmosphere, which is really pretty bad for global warming. Texas set a record in 2019 for venting or flaring because as they're building up oil production, you just get gas with it. And they didn't have enough gas pipelines. They couldn't build them fast enough. It wasn't worth it. You just burn off or vent the gas. Last time I looked was, I think, 2024. Texas was still flaring, burning off, venting, just, I don't know, several billion cubic feet of gas worth $500 million a year worth of gas, just
Well,
literally up in smoke because they could get away with it. And the oil was so profitable, it made sense just to burn off the gas. Well, that's Texas. You can't do that in Alaska.
yeah.
So
Wow.
we're better, but it's still people got to remember it's oil and gas. There's that risk.
Mhm. So you wrote about this a lot, and then you took on some advice. Would you consider advising or consulting? I know some people don't like the term consulting, but you've been pretty important or had some, I don't want to say influence, but you've met with people in DC over the last 20 or so years. What types of things have you been asked to advise on or give insight on?
Yeah, I guess I would say I attempted to influence. I'm not sure I ever influenced anybody. No, I was never a consultant. I had, well, a couple different DC jobs. Well, three actually. One, I worked in the governor's office in Washington, D.C. in 2007, 2008. Most states have a governor's office in D.C. to work on federal issues. So I worked in the state of Alaska's governor's D.C. office, 07, '08, on oil and gas fiscal, tax, telecommunications, transportation, Arctic issues. Then I went back 2010, 2015 to run a federal agency that had been created to try to help coordinate all the other federal agencies that would be working on an Alaska North Slope natural gas pipeline, which people have been talking about from the 70s, and we're still talking about it in 2026. It still hasn't gone ahead. The office, actually, I closed the office, yeah, the government, and I agree. People just said, look, there's no project. Let's just close this down. So I worked on that. And then when Mary Peltola was first elected to Congress in August 2022, she asked if I'd come back and help her through the end of that year just to set up the office, work on some policy issues, try to help her. This is all new to her. So I went back for 4 months in 2022 to help just get things started and try to come up with some policy papers and meet with constituents just so that she could go be a freshman legislator and not have to worry about meeting everyone who came in the door.
Mhm. What have you seen change since the early 2000s? Because I know when logging went out in Southeast Alaska, that was a huge economic issue there. There's been a transition to tourism, but we've seen financially that the state, if it doesn't have revenue from interest off from the perm fund or from production, you can make a great amount of money locally for your local economy, but the state really needs other sources of revenue. So what have you seen and what have like a reality seems to have descended on Alaska in the 2000s?
I mean, the state never made much money off logging. It was for the community, sales tax, property tax, jobs. I mean, look at the state, what's called the unrestricted general fund budget. That's the money that comes in that the legislature can argue about how to spend. There's a lot of federal money for roads, got to spend it on roads, got to spend it on airports, got to spend it on food stamp programs. But the unrestricted money that comes in, depending on how oil prices are going, the permanent fund earnings 65% of the state budget. Oil will be higher this year because the president started the war. Oil prices are up, but generally, oil is going to be 25, 30% of the revenue. All the other taxes, alcohol, tobacco, motor fuel, corporates, non-oil and gas corporate taxes, fish tax, everything else, total, I don't know, 7, 8% of state revenues. Timber, mining, it's just, I don't want to say 400 million, 500 million is pipsqueak, but if you're looking at a $6 billion general fund revenue, and you look at all the other economic activity, it's pretty small. People refer to it as the Alaska disconnect, in that, let's say you start a new oil company, find oil, that's great, we get a lot of money. But if you start a new window manufacturing plant or hotel, fish plant, anything else with a lot of employees, you're going to need services for that business and the employees. And because there's no state sales tax, there's no state property tax except oil and gas, there's no state income tax. You could have situations where there's so much activity, so many employees, so many services that those people need, but not any revenue to the state to pay for it. It's a loser. Now, yes, Ketchikan, for example, would have sales tax, property tax, but the state level, we don't. The state doesn't really get anything from economic activity other than, unless it's a barrel of oil, anything appreciable.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's one of the things that people look around during the summer and they think, man, if we're getting 1.8 million tourists off cruise ships, how are we in any sort of financial problem? Because we are absolutely, it seems like we're filled beyond the brim with tourism, but that's very, very small drop in the bucket when it comes to revenue that the state can use. We're not getting anything else, and even was it 2016 when part of the perm fund check was, I don't wanna say taken, or was it we're
Well, it was right. Governor Walker vetoed the permanent fund dividend at year and about half because they own the money. I mean, it's just you can't issue dividends if the check's going to bounce.
Mhm.
So yeah, he did that in 2016. So on tourism, it's a good point. 1.6 million in Ketchikan, Juneau this year. A lot of sales tax revenue, no question about it. The state gets a per passenger tax on cruise ships. They then share that with the municipalities. For example, the capital budget that the Senate Finance Committee just released this week in Juneau has uses 9.15 million of basically passenger fee revenue. They would spend it to electrify the cruise ship dock in Ketchikan, so you could run off electricity instead of fuel burning at the dock. So much of the money the state does get from the cruise industry goes back into spending for things that help the industry, well, and help tourism,
Mhm.
or in this case, clean up the air in Ketchikan.
Mhm. So, if people have said that if the state is in dire financial straits, why can't we cut things? Or, like, is there an itemized budget? Why can't we look at things that need to be cut? There's been some talk about how we're right-sizing schools in Alaska, and the BSA hasn't gone up permanently and substantially for over 10 years. So when you look at the inflation over that time, it's been gutting schools. And so regardless of how good or bad a school district was with their individual budgets across the state, schools are closing and massive amounts of layoffs are happening. So it seems that we've kind of gone past right sizing into severe cuts. So what is the state? Are we frivolous with money in other areas, or like are we? Is it pretty much some sort of tax, or we're there's nothing else?
It's expensive to run services in Alaska. There's no economy of scale. Talking about public health nurses or disaster response or anything. A lot of cases, other than the road system, you're flying people in and out for. So it is really expensive. Well, schools, right? Remote schools, village schools, Prince of Wales Island schools, they're a lot more expensive to run than a big school on a road system in central Missouri. The fastest growing expense in the state budget are prisons.
Mm,
$500 million a year to run the Department of Corrections. Now, you want to start letting them out? You want to chain them to the wall and not provide 3 meals a day? Yes, you can cut prison spending, not humanely. And certainly, yeah, there are probably some people who could be let out and not be a danger to society. But so, inflation, fuel costs, we see obviously we're all paying more at the pump. Well, so is the Marine Highway System. So is the Department of Transportation. So it's high oil prices are great, but for revenue, but also drives our expenses. Alaska's just a very spread out state. It's expensive to provide services. Well, not, some people have said, well, let's go back to private prisons. Let's ship the Alaska inmates down south to Arizona and stick them in a private prison. Save money. Probably would. You also are separating them from their families. And if they have any hope of getting back into life when they get out, because most inmates get out, they don't die in prison. Well, don't you want to? Do you want to do something that's going to make it harder for them to come back to society and dump them in Arizona? So, look, legislators I've watched for decades. We got to cut the budget. This past last week, the House was talking about this year's operating budget proposal, and you had some members of the House saying we need to give more in dividends. So here's my proposal to cut spending. I don't know. They wanted to give another $900 million to dividends, and they proposed $10 million of cuts. Well, come on, guys.
yeah.
Telling you're gonna telling people on a campaign trail you're gonna cut government is a winning strategy. Doing it never seems to happen because it's just not there, not at a big level. Sure, you can find small pockets, but you also have to make decisions. Do you want inmates to go to Arizona? Or do you want to keep them in Alaska? What kind of hours do you want public libraries to have? What kind of funding do you want for harbor and dock rebuilds as they come up? You got to make those calls. The other thing I'll mention is certainly if you did not pay a dividend, the state would be very healthy. Last year's dividend was $650 million cost to the state. The House version this year is about $1 billion. I think the Senate will reduce that. There are some who argue get rid of the dividend before you impose taxes. Because you get rid of the PFD, probably don't need taxes. But getting rid of the dividend, I mean, I'm honest, it's not going to hurt my budget,
Mm.
but there's a significant portion of Alaska who really does depend on that annual cash. So it becomes the human values. Do I eliminate the dividend knowing that maybe half of Alaskans, more than half, won't suffer, but a significant portion will see a deterioration in their life because and their kids' life because they don't get that dividend. But others say, well, I'll vote for a tax, but not to pay a dividend. Well, once the tax revenue goes into the checkbook, it's hard to say which dollar paid for schools and which paid for a dividend. It's all one checkbook.
Yeah. How has that conversation evolved in your time covering it? Because obviously now in the age of social media, people can show what they did or what they're fighting for, and it can be this their message can get out and be very, very strong and people follow it and there's no context to it. There's no depth of understanding. So how has I guess maybe the internet and social media impacted the way these discussions are being had?
It's, it has made it easier to veer from reality and harder to deal with reality. Governor Dunleavy's in the last year, it was 8 years as governor, campaigned successfully, wildly successful in his two elections for governor by promising a full dividend. The checks would bounce. The money's not there. Well, it doesn't matter. You still promise it. And I think social media's, I want to say dumbed down. It has turned substantial policy debates into what memes or those things are, or TikTok videos and all the other garbage. It's made it hard because to say dividend versus taxes, prisoners in state, out of state, do you want to double university tuition? Do you want to right now in Alaska, any community with 10 students gets a school. That's
Mm,
was a settlement decades ago out of a court case for villages, rural Alaskans. Well, you could close a bunch of schools if you change that to 25. If you don't have 25 students in your town, that's it. No state school. Got to do correspondence. Those are hard decisions, important decisions. You can't do those with your two thumbs on a phone.
yeah.
But I'm not a whole fan of social media, so yeah, I'll try not to get wound up.
No, I think that's a reality, and I think as consumers of that, when we buy into these overly simplistic representations of what is a really important conversation, it's not a new conversation. This has been a debate forever. It's just done in a way that seems much less good faith and much less or more disingenuous, but obviously there were some people that were probably shady in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, like that human nature hasn't changed, but
Right.
social media's provided the outlet to bring out the worst in
Right.
us.
Senator Joe McCarthy from Minnesota. Everybody's a communist. So, there's some people who believe Alaska won't deal with reality until we're bleeding, really bleeding. Well, I don't think that's particularly healthy for a community. Well, wait till the school collapses and things are so dire and miserable that you got a triage who goes into ER. But there's some who say until that happens, we won't have the political will to do it. I
Mhm.
think the next governor is going to have a real problem because the next governor hopefully will tell the truth and it's going to have to be one hell of a leader to bring the public and the legislature along to say, guys, we all know this. We've all talked about it. We don't have the nerve to do anything. We got to summon the nerve. We've got to fix this. We're in our 13th year now of outmigration, meaning more people leave the state every year than move here. You're not replenishing the workforce. You look at some of these towns and they're just aging. They have a worker shortage because there's no one there at that working age and new people not coming in. These are not easy to fix. It's going to take one hell of a governor who can work with the legislature and a lot of people making hard choices that probably cost them their elected job. But better for the state. So it's easier for me to say I'm not an elected official.
You mentioned that it's gonna take maybe us to get to the point where we're doing a substantial amount of bleeding. Do you think we're at that point? Or are we close to it? Or, like
Well, I think we're close to it, but obviously not enough to change public opinion. Now we'll see. We got an election coming up in November. We're going to elect a U.S. senator and a U.S. House member, though those certainly aren't involved with state fiscal policy, but they set a political tone. A governor, lieutenant governor, the entire state house, half the state senate. I think we'll get an indication there. Are people, well, it's sort of like the midterms on the national level. Certainly, Democrats are hoping to see a wake up message from American voters in the midterms. Take back the Senate, maybe the House. I guess I kind of look at Alaska's election similar in a way that do Alaskans start electing more legislators who want to deal with this because they need safety in numbers. If you're the only legislator saying, come on, guys, we got to do something, no one's behind you. If you get a dozen or more behind you, now you start getting some political weight in the House. So I'm looking at the elections. I'm trying to be hopeful.
Mhm. Are you say you're trying to be hopeful? Are you convincing yourself that you are hopeful, or is it a pretty tough
You
sell?
know, I'm a Cubs fan. I've been hopeful my whole life. We got lucky once in 2016. Maybe we'll get lucky again. I think if we don't deal with it, it's going to be bad, really bad. I mean, it's like you say, you look into schools, you look at other services that are deteriorating, and certainly this governor and others have just wanted to put more of the burden on cities and boroughs. There's a limit to what the Ketchikan Gateway Borough or the city and borough of Wrangell can accommodate.
Yeah. The realm of politics seems to be not worth it for a lot of the people that we would probably want to be our leaders, and they don't wanna put
Yes.
themselves, they don't wanna put their families through it, and so the people that we really want to be our leaders look at it and think, "Man, it's not worth it. I care a lot about my
Right.
country, I care a lot about my state, but I have to also care about my sanity and my family," and so it really disincentivizes it, and it elevates people who really don't have much of desire for anything except for personal power, clout, and money.
Yes. Yeah. It costs a lot of money. It's a lot of personal sacrifice. It puts your family through a lot to run for public office because you don't know what crazy falsehoods, misleading statements, some nutball, sleazeball is going to dredge up on social media about you, your family, your parents, your aunt, 3 times removed second cousin. Who knows what they dig up? And then when you get elected, it's constant. It's a lot of work. Yeah, it pays better than journalists, but you're not going to get rich off of it. So, yeah, it's hard. You have a lot of good people saying, "Look, I got a great job and a great life. No, I'm not going to burn it all down just to be a member of the legislature or run for city council or school board." And you're right, but we've got to find those people, or we're destined to failure.
Mhm. So is being publisher of the, Wrangell Sentinel, is that like a time to kind of take a breath and think this is the core journalism of a small community, this is preventing a news desert, or does that just add to your stress?
Oh, it adds to it. I bought it back 5 years ago. My late wife and I owned it 76, 84. Different owners through the years. I bought it back almost 5.5 years ago, thinking, oh, it's kind of slid down. I can help rejuvenate it and then turn it over to some young person. Well, it loses money. It loses a little money. Last year, it lost $30,000. It'll lose more this year. So people don't read newspapers, and our readership is old.
Yeah.
Well, I lose money on every paper we print, but younger people, uh, and it's not that they're bad people, it's just not how they were raised, it's not part of it's just they get their I almost said they get their news, they get what they think is news some other way through scrolling or some other crap on the phone, and Wrangell's not alone, all newspapers nationwide losing readership, costs are going up, papers are closing, uh, I don't know what the future is. The Cordova Times stopped printing. They just are online only. A couple months ago, Seward lost his newspaper a long time ago. Newspaper in Homer. Key and I are both shaky. It's just a tough business. So I'd like to think we're helping bring information to the public, but I don't know how to get them to read it.
Mm. What would be is there some sort of solution, or is there something that outside of a massive social cultural shift to going back to reading papers and subscribing, being informed and caring more about what's right for the community and as a whole, knowing that there are some trade-offs and give and take. Is there things that we as just community members can do to help out this process?
Well, read the paper and buy a subscription, but there's a lot of newspapers around the country that are going to a nonprofit model or funder model. So newspapers used to get, generalizing here, 2/3 of their revenue from advertising. Classified ads were huge. Public notices, department stores, car dealers, real estate. Not so much maybe in Wrangell where there's never a car dealer, but and 1/3 of your income from readers. Well, advertising's gone. No one buys classified ads anymore. First it was Craigslist, now Facebook, department stores, car dealers, grocery stores. They just all use social media. Restaurants. There's no restaurant in Wrangell that ever buys an ad.
Mm,
And I'm not blaming them. They just post their daily specials on Facebook. So now the business model for newspapers is 1/3 advertising, 1/3 from readers, and the other third is a loss. You
mm,
just subsidize it. So some newspapers are switching to the nonprofit or funding model. And that business plan is instead of asking for subscriptions, you're asking people to make donations like public radio.
mm,
And I have a hard time with that, and one reason I haven't done it is, yes, I lose money. Yes, I've subsidized it for 5 years, but take Wrangell, you've also got people asking for money for public radio, the senior center, hospice, the
mm.
library. I'm trying to think of all the other Little
Sports
League,
travel,
sports
yeah.
travels, right. Why should I be more important than them?
Yeah.
Yeah, if I people have limited money to donate. So if I say, "God, you gotta give me $100 because we're losing money." Well, okay, I can give it to you, but then I can't give it to the sports travel fund.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe the sports travel fund is more important. I'm just trying to be honest. I feel real uncomfortable saying, okay, gotta fund me too. Put me on your charity list, Salvation Army, Toys for Tots, all that stuff. There's so many nonprofits trying to get money. I'm real uncomfortable saying me too,
Mhm. What are you
even though
excited
I
about?
certainly love the money.
Yeah. What is something that you're excited about? Is there something that's on the horizon, something that you just enjoy doing that makes you pretty excited?
Comes one today. Yeah, I like writing. I like writing editorials and opinion columns, and I like writing news stories. I like connecting with people. The fun thing to me about being a journalist, print, radio, even TV, you learn something new every day.
Mm,
I interviewed a guy about the Intuit stick pole competition at the Native Youth Olympics. I didn't know what that was. So it's just, it's like reading a book without having to read the book. You just learn something new. You meet different people. And along the way, you hopefully make people's lives better. I just got to figure out some way to get them to read it and to break even.
mhm.
I'd be happy, ecstatic if we could break even.
So in closing here, where can people find some of your pieces? What are some political things maybe that people should be aware of or looking forward to?
Well, they could go to the Wrangell Sentinel website, which is wranglsentinel.com. We do have a paywall, but I think you're allowed to look at 3 articles a month for free. There's some, they call it a leaky paywall.
Mm,
Ketchikan Daily News prints some of my columns. The Sitka Sentinel prints some. Petersburg Pilot, the Juneau Independent. We try to share among Southeast newspapers. But no, I haven't started doing podcasts, and so I guess that would be probably the best best way. I don't have my own website. I guess I should say that. I thought about, boy, then I could post wherever I want. Well, no one wants to hear that much from me, so I have not gone that route yet.
yeah. Well, thanks a lot for being on here. Really
Sure.
appreciate
Well,
it.
thank you.
A
This
great talk
was
with you.
this was fun.
Thanks for listening. Please share. If you found today's conversation useful, you can go deeper with my writing on Substack. That's where I expand on these ideas from the show, share essays, reporting, and things I'm thinking about in real time. You can find it at From the 49th on Substack. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.